Hey everybody, Ryan Grant here and welcome back to the YouTube channel. In today's video, I'm basically going to be going over with you guys 5 really simple and easy steps and actionable items that you can start doing that is going to make eating in a calorie surplus go from difficult and being a struggle to being easy, effortless, and doing it as simple as that. Okay, but before we get into these 5 actionable steps, let me just introduce myself to you guys very quickly. So my name is Ryan. I just turned 20 the other day, and over the past 4 years I've completely transformed myself, gaining over 27 kilos of lean mass, as you can see right here, from 2021 to 2025. And now I'm on a mission to help thousands of men, if possible, to do the exact same thing and make the exact same transformation. So now you know about me and what this video is all about. We've got nothing else to say, so let's get into step 1. So step 1, in order to make eating in a calorie surplus very easy for you, is not actually eating in a calorie surplus straight away. And what I mean by this is step 1 is training yourself, and what I like to call the training phase. Okay, so I do this at the start of my bulk, and I assume a lot of other people do as well, as it is the most sensible thing to do, and it is the way to actually eventually get yourself eating in a calorie surplus consistently. And what this training phase basically consists of is just slowly training your body to be able to training your body up slowly to the point where it can eventually withstand and sustain eating in a calorie surplus consistently every single day easily. And this doesn't happen overnight. You can't just go from eating whatever you eat now, being inconsistent, to eating in a calorie surplus straight away, because your body's not used to it, right? And if you make that sudden switch, your body's going to react so sensitively, and you're inevitably going to burn out. So we have to build it up really slowly. And a huge mistake that I see beginners make and guys make when they want to try and bulk and obviously eat in a calorie surplus is that they say that they can't eat in the calorie surplus, even though they're stuffing themselves silly and trying to eat as much food as possible. They just find it impossible to stay consistent, and that is because they don't slowly train their bodies up to be able to withstand and sustain that amount of calories every single day. They just don't build themselves up and train their bodies to actually be able to do so, right? It's like if you went into playing a football match or a soccer match, if you're American, for 90 minutes or 120 minutes, right? And you did no training or fitness prior to that, you would be absolutely fucked within the first 10, 15, maybe even 20 minutes, right? Let alone 90 minutes, you'll be on the floor huffing and puffing by half time. So it's so important that obviously if you want to withstand the full 90 minutes of football, you need to go to training sessions. You may need to do runs in your spare time to get your fitness up, to get your footballing ability up, to actually play well and consistently well. And this applies with the gym as well. You've got to slowly train yourself up, and you can't do what is necessary straight away, as you need to actually you need to just build your ability up to obviously consume those calories, right? So now you're probably asking, what does this training phase consist of? Well, it is really simple. There are a couple more things to what I'm about to say, but these are the two main components and the main principles of this so-called training phase that I like to call it. And this training phase, just so you know, doesn't last too long. It probably only lasts 2 to 3 weeks. It's just where you, first of all, slowly increase the portion size as you eat, right? So you're not eating calorie surplus like portions straight away, right? You're probably starting at maintenance, or even if it's in a slight deficit. You just want to get consistent with your eating patterns, and I'm going to get onto that in the second point, because that links to obviously building up the consistency in the eating patterns. However, you just want to slowly increase your portion sizes over time, and this is obviously going to help expand your stomach. And no, don't worry, it's not going to be like you're going to get fat. It just basically you won't even notice the difference, but internally it's going to slowly help expand your stomach, so you can eventually have the ability to stomach more food, and in turn eat in a calorie surplus a lot easier, and obviously stay consistent with it, and not burn out and just end up in this loop that you may be in right now. So that's the first one. You want to slowly increase your portion sizes, and I'll give you guys a really good example of this. So at the start of my bulk that I've just come off, so in at the end of September 2024, I basically started with this so-called training phase, and one of the portions that I was eating that enabled me to slowly build my body up was 4 eggs and one bit of toast, right? I was on that for maybe 4 to 5 days, and then after that portion became easier to eat, I eventually upped that to 5 eggs and 2 bits of toast. And then when that became easy to eat, I eventually got up to what I ate in a the calorie surplus meal, which was 6 eggs and 2 bits of toast, and obviously cheese and smoke. I really like to have smoked salmon in the eggs to, mix up the flavors and stuff. And then eventually I iterated even more, and then instead of the 2 bits of bread, I added 2 bagels, right? And an avocado, which then made that meal, around 1,000 calories, 1,100 calories, depending on whether I had an orange juice with that meal. And that basically just it led to me having a third of my daily calorie intake in one meal, right? So it's all about training yourself and slowly increasing the portion sizes. And I'm telling you, right? You don't have to rush straight into eating a calorie surplus. It's all about how you approach it, right? So that's the first component of this so-called training phase. So now the second component, which actually is the second point that is going to make eating in the calorie surplus a lot easier for you, is meal timings, right? If you're a regular watcher of my channel, you're probably really bored of me mentioning this. However, it is super, super important. So I want to drill it into your head, because it is one of the most important things that has helped me gain 10 kilos in 180 days on 2 separate occasions in 2023 and 2024 on both my bulks. This is probably one of the most, if not the most important component to helping me eating in the calorie surplus consistently. So what do I mean by meal timing? So you want to make sure you're eating at similar or at the same times every day. And the reason I said similar as well is because if your schedule is changing, then obviously you may not necessarily be able to eat at the same times every day. However, you want to keep it as similar as possible, and this is because it just allows it allows us to work with our bodies, and more specifically a hormone in our bodies called the ghrelin hormone. And if you don't necessarily know what the ghrelin hormone is, it basically just refers to a hormone that, to put it into simple terms, it sends a message to our brain to to tell our brain that we're hungry, and then in turn our brain does its magic, obviously, and it helps stimulate our appetite. Therefore, we start to feel hungry. And if we start to feel hungry at the same times every day, it's going to be a lot easier to eat our calories. However, if we were eating at completely random times and we were making our body do guesswork, then we may have a random spike in our appetite when we're not even meant to eat, and then when it comes around to the time we're meant to eat, we're not necessarily going to be that hungry, and it's just really not effective. And it's so much easier for you and so much simpler for you if you actually eat at similar or same times every day. And don't forget, it's all about how simple we can keep things. We don't want to overcomplicate things, because when we overcomplicate things, that's when it gets a lot harder, and that's when inconsistency comes in, and that's when you're just going to end up back at square one. So I would highly suggest, right now, just I go through your schedule and see what you do every day that's non-negotiable, that you can't move around when you go to the gym. And obviously you want to have your meal timings around that. Obviously you want to have a pre-workout meal before the gym to give you energy, to get you fired up for the gym, to give you fuel, to get you hyped up for the gym, around 30 minutes to an hour and a half before the workout. And the later in that time range, the better. So the closer you are to an hour and a half eating a pre-workout meal, the better. And obviously your post-workout meal, you can have anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes after the session to like 45 minutes and an hour after the session. So making sure you're eating at the same times every day is extremely important. And I'll give you guys an example of my meal timing. So at one stage throughout my bulk, so One time, I think it was from November to around, actually no, it's from October when I started my bulk to January when I sort of took a little break and rejigged my routine. So the first meal I was having was at 6:45 in the morning, and then I went to the gym at 7:30. So this meal one was my pre-workout meal, and then meal two was around 9:15 when I got back from the gym, and then meal three was around 1 p.m. So around 1 p.m. I've already had 3 meals, right? And I'm going to get onto the effectiveness of this in point number 3 of this video. So meal 1 at 6:45, gym at 7:30, meal 2 at 9:15, meal 3 at 1 p.m. Meal 4, sorry, at 6:30 p.m. and meal 5 at 8 p.m., right? And I kept this as consistent as possible so my body could actually know when to tell me when to feel hungry to eat, which obviously makes things a lot easier when you have to eat the food. It's going to be a lot easier to finish your food, etc., etc. So that's point number 2. That's point number 1, and obviously point number 2 is added on at the end in the meal timings and the training phase. So that's basically what the training phase is, right? Slowly increasing your portion sizes and picking consistent meal times throughout the day so you can work with your body and your body can actually figure out when to tell you to be hungry, and obviously that's going to be at the correct times throughout the day. The first 2 points. So the first one is obviously you want to train yourself, this so-called training phase, and then point number 2 is you want to eat at this most similar or at the same times every day, and just make it as similar as you possibly can. So now moving on to point number 3, and point number 3 is it's going to be a lot easier to eat in a surplus every day if you give yourself more time to spread out your meals, right? This is super, super important because if you're having your meals really, really close together, then you're not going to allow your body enough time to actually digest those meals, obviously clear them out of your system, and therefore in turn start to rebuild the appetite for the next meal, right? For example, if you ate, this is a really extreme example, but if you ate meal 1 at like 10 a.m, meal 2 at 11 a.m, meal 3 at 12, midday, meal 4 at 1 p.m, obviously you wouldn't do that, right? But it's just an example and an exaggeration. You're not necessarily going to have a big appetite for the following meals after the first one because it's still focusing on digesting the first one, right? So you want to make sure from when you wake up to when you go to bed, you want to allow yourself as much time as possible, and you want to be able to spread out the meals as much as you possibly can. So what I would recommend for you is to allow at least an hour and a half to 3 hours between each meal. So you're giving your body enough time to digest, and then you regain the appetite, right? So as you saw with my meal plan, I had my meal 1 at 6:45, and then I had my meal 2 at 9:15, right? That's 2.5 hours difference, right? And then from 9:15 to 1 p.m, that is uh, that is 3 hours and 45 minutes, if I'm correct with my maths, my mental maths. And then meal 4, the difference between meal 3 and meal 4 was from 1 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. So 5.5 hours difference. And then from 6:30 p.m. to 8 p.m, obviously that's an hour and a half difference. And I wouldn't necessarily suggest being as close to an hour and a half as that. You want to be closer to the 3 hour range in terms of spreading your meals out. However, as I said with point number 2, if you start eating at these times, your body's going to start to recognize these patterns, and it's going to be a lot easier for you. So that's point number 3. You just want to make sure you spread your meals out as much as possible and you don't cramp them in. Because what a lot of people do is they don't save their calories, but they eat their calories later in the day and they cram them in, which is really not a good thing to do, because the likelihood of you not actually consuming all the calories you need to is going to be very, very high. However, if you spread them throughout the day, you're going to have more time and enable your body more time for those calories to digest. Therefore, the chances of you feeling hungrier more is going to be a lot better, right? So the more time you allow yourself throughout the day, the more the more you're going to be able to spread out your meals. Therefore, the better. It's going to be a lot easier to eat in calorie surplus, etc., etc. So that's point number 3 ticked off now. So now onto the penultimate point of the video, point number 4, and this is to optimize your sleep. Sleep is super important for the well-being of a human. And I was thinking about this the other day, and I was having a conversation with someone I know about the importance of sleep and why it should be as optimized as possible, right? Think about it like this, right? If humans just didn't sleep, right? If you just chose to not sleep ever again, what would eventually happen? You would eventually die, right? That's the extremity of what can happen and the consequences of what can happen if you don't sleep. However, think of the opposite of that. If you made your sleep the best it could possibly be, then you're going to be maxing out your health stats. You're going to be living a better quality life. Your well-being is going to be through the roof. Your mental health is going to be great. You're going to feel better than ever. So it's super important that we optimize our sleep, because if we sort of reverse engineer the consequences of not sleeping, which is obviously eventually dying, we can obviously get those good things, right? So it's super important we are optimizing our sleep. However, in this situation, in this scenario, it is important we optimize our sleep, because better sleep improves, improves the function and the productivity of our digestive system, and obviously our, the regulation of our hormones, which can be absolutely crucial towards, well, obviously the hormones are very important towards our drive and desire to do things. And if we have a bad sleep and we're feeling tired and we're not feeling motivated and ready to kick down the day and do what we need to do, then it's going to be very difficult to eat in a calorie surplus. And another thing is with the digestive system as well. If you wake up, if you have a really bad sleep and your diet, and obviously that's not necessarily going to improve your digestive system and health, then it's going to probably be a lot more difficult to eat food, right? So making sure you optimize your sleep for this reason is super important, and it's going to be a lot easier to eat in a calorie surplus, trust me. And I've got a few things that I want to go over with you guys that is going to, a few pointers that can help you really enhance the quality of your sleep. So the first one is you don't want to eat or drink at least 2 hours before you go to bed. However, if you don't necessarily have time throughout the day to do that and you get back from work pretty late, then by all means just make sure you don't eat or drink at least an hour before you go to sleep. And the reason why this is because you got to think about it like this. Your body takes time to digest these things. It just doesn't happen like that. It does take time. So when, for example, if you eat half an hour before you go to bed, and you eat at 9:30 p.m. and then you're in bed by 10, right? You're trying to go to sleep mentally, right? However, physically, you're still awake, because your body is still trying to, it has to carry out the digestive process. Can't just leave the food in the stomach and, can't just turn off the cognition of the digestive system and turn it on tomorrow morning and carry on. It doesn't work like that. It's obviously self-automated, so it's still going to be digesting and functioning, which obviously isn't in line with what you want to do. And because of this, and because you can't necessarily stop this process from happening, it's very likely that you're not going to get to sleep very quickly, right? And the most optimal latency, which is the amount of time from when you get into bed to when you go to sleep, to have a good sleep, the amount of time it should take is anywhere from between, 10 to 30 minutes, right? And obviously, if you eat before, very soon before, then it's going to maybe take you a lot longer to get to sleep. So don't eat or drink 2 hours, at least 2 hours before you go to sleep. And the second one that I want to go over with you guys is to make sure you're going to sleep at the same times every day. If you go to sleep at the same times every day, then you're naturally going to start waking up at the same times every day, and you won't necessarily be needing to rely on that alarm all the time and waking up to that horrible noise, whatever you have your alarm set at. And obviously this is going to regulate something called our circadian rhythm. And if you don't know what this is, it's basically our body clock on our 24-hour body clock, right? If you're going to bed at 4 a.m. one night and then 9 p.m. one night, your body clock is going to be completely destroyed and it's not going to know what time zone to operate on. So it's extremely important you stay consistent with sleeping at the same time, right? So that is the penultimate point, point number 4. So now moving on to the final point of this video, point number 5, and it is eat smart, not big, right? I've said this in a few videos, but I've seen people on, on different social media platforms giving advice to people struggling to eat in a calorie surplus. And obviously, the main comment is, stop complaining, eat more, right? Which I completely agree with. However, there is a better way to go about that, and there is a better mindset to adopt than just thinking about having to eat as much food as possible, right? Instead of eating big to get big, eat as little as possible to get big, right? You want to be smart about the foods you're eating. You don't necessarily want to be eating huge amounts of volume, but you want to be obviously, consuming the calories. So you want to be consuming more calorie dense foods, right? So foods that aren't necessarily too big in volume, but they are very calorie dense. And obviously you want to keep these foods as healthy as possible. However, you want to be eating smart, not big. And in order to explain this point very, very simply, right? Imagine a magic man just spawned in your room, right? He just came in your room and said, he held out his two hands, right? And imagine you're a troubled teenager or you're a lost teenager and you don't necessarily know what you're doing with your life. And he held out these two options. On this hand is a very, very simple path to $1 million, right? Just a straight line. However, this hand is holding out a path that does all sorts of zigzags and loops and then eventually gets to $1 million. You know, which one would you choose? Obviously you choose this one because it is a simpler one. It's the exact same with this, right? Imagine if this magic man held out the amount of calories you needed to eat in order to be in a surplus, but this one was a lot less and still pretty healthy than this one, which was just a ridiculous amount, right? Obviously you'd eat this plate off this hand because it's just going to be a lot easier. So you don't want to be eating as much as you can. You want to be eating as little as you can in order to meet the requirements, right? So that's just the food for thought. And remember that meal that I was going on about that was around 1,000 calories, right? 6 eggs, 2 bagels, cheese, salmon, avocado, and an orange juice on the side, right? That does add up to around 1,000 to 1,100 calories, and that is a very healthy, nutrient dense meal. Okay, so that is the end of this video. Thank you very, very much for watching. I do really appreciate your time. If you have stayed this far, then I would absolutely love it if I could invite you into my very own free community where I'm currently helping 220 plus men with weight gain and muscle gain, and obviously giving them that helping hand and guiding them in the right direction. So if you want to start your journey off in the right way, then it would be an absolute pleasure to have you. It's going to be the top link in the description. However, if you do want to stay on the YouTube channel, then that is fine by me. If you did enjoy this video, please make sure you drop a thumbs up, drop a comment down below, and obviously if you want to stay around for future videos, there's a big fat red button somewhere down there. I'd really appreciate if you hit that. I upload every Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday, and I can say that very, very soon I'm going to start uploading actual videos of me training in the gym, which I think is pretty idiotic that I haven't really been doing that now, because that is what I'm trying to teach, right? So what better way to teach you guys than to actually see me train and do the actions, right? So if you want to stay around for that, stay tuned. I'm very excited to be actually filming in the gym again. I haven't really got much more to say. Find me in the community if you want to. See you later.